Hello, everyone. Haku, Maktaka Jess McCool. My name is Jess McCool. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining virtually from Shmuich land, also known as Santa Barbara. Kashtoa Paktina Kakinalan. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm a program associate for the Community Resilience Centers program at the California Strategic Growth Council. Thank you for tuning in for the CRC Round 1 application webinar series. In this video, we will be reviewing the CRC Implementation Grants. Before we get started, if you wish to request webinar materials in an alternative format or need translation or interpretation services, please let us know and we will follow up to get you those materials and services. There are a few ways you can do this. You can email our team inbox at crc@sgc.ca.gov, or you can click on the link in this video description and let us know in the post-webinar survey. We also really quickly wanted to share ways you can contact us and stay informed about the CRC program. Please visit the webpage, and in particular, the CRC application materials webpage to find guidance documents and other application materials. We are experiencing slight delays in updating our webpage, so while the most accurate information will be represented there eventually, the quickest way to get and receive updates about the program is by signing up for the CRC email list. As always, you can also email the team at crc@sgc.ca.gov. And although we have someone from the team consistently monitoring this inbox, there is higher traffic than normal, so our response times are longer than average, but we are actively working on getting back to all of the messages we're receiving. And if you have a question about the implementation grants that isn't addressed in this video, you can submit those questions on the post-webinar survey linked in the video description below, and we will follow up with you. Or you can attend an upcoming office hour session, and we will share the full schedule later on in this video for that. So welcome to the Community Resilience Center's Round 1 application webinar series. The first webinar of the series is already posted in this video playlist. If you are new to learning about this grant program, I'd recommend watching that first video as it provides a broad overview of the CRC Round 1 final guidelines and the notice of funding availability. The remaining 3 cover more details specific to each grant type. Today, we are focusing on the CRC Implementation Grants. The other 2 videos in the series focus on planning grants and project development grants. So here is our plan for the webinar today. We will start with a brief program overview, then focus in on implementation grants. We will talk about the application process and components, demo the submittable application platform, and then close out. Here are our objectives for today's webinar. To provide program overview of the CRC Round 1 implementation grants, to review the application process and components, to offer reminders and updates about upcoming due dates, application materials, and office hours, and to demo the submittable application platform. Our goal with this webinar is to help applicants to the program navigate through this complicated and involved process. So some of the slides later on in the presentation may seem very dense and full of information. This is solely for your use, and we encourage you to move through this video at your own pace, using the time codes below to navigate to different sections of the video and pause when you need. So I'm going to pause here and let the rest of the team introduce themselves, and I'll pass it off to Dora to start.
Hello, my name is Dora Monterosa. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a CRC program analyst joining virtually from Nisanan land, also called Sacramento, California. And I'll pass to Lisa next.
Hi, everyone. Lisa Hu. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a CRC program analyst joining virtually from Ohlone land, also called Oakland. Coral?
Hello, everybody. My name is Coral Abbott. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a CRC program manager, joining virtually also from Nisanan land, also known as Sacramento, California. And I'll pass it to Angel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angel de Dios. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a CRC intern, joining virtually from Kumeya'a land, also known as Calexico, California. And we do have another team member who was unable to join us today, whom is Jessica Cervantes, CRC Program Associate based in Los Angeles. I will present now the next section. We will start with a brief overview of the entire program. Then we will zoom in on implementation grants, including the application process and components. Then we will share the screen to show you the submittable application platform, and then close out with some final reminders about office hours and the program timeline. So we're going to do a final funding breakdown for round 1. SGC received around $110 million through the general fund in this current budget year to implement the program. That includes grants, staff to work on the program, technical assistance, and evaluation. Of the total funds, $98.6 million will be available for round 1 grants. A total of $5 million will be available for CRC planning grants, each ranging from $100,000 to $500,000. Planning grants will fund communities in initial stages of CRC project development that need funds for plant development, community engagement, coordination, and other necessary activities to prepare for round 2 and 3. A total of $9.6 million will be available for CRC project development grants. These grant awards each range from $500,000 to $5 million. Project development grants will fund pre-development and basic infrastructure activities that advance community service facilities' ability to serve as a future community resilience center and prepare grantees for CRC's rounds 2 and 3 and other related funding opportunities. A total of $84 million will be available for CRC implementation grants, each ranging from $1 million to $10 million. Implementation grants will fund new construction and upgrades to serve as community resilience centers, as well as services and programs that build overall community resilience. We'll now go over to the program overview. Our program approach is pulled from a combination of requirements of statute, priorities we heard during initial listening sessions, the public comment period, stakeholder interviews and meetings, and advice from folks with experience developing resilience centers or hubs. Here's a quick overview. We want to build climate resilient and community resilience, prioritize community serving locations, require community engagement and collaborative stakeholder structure. The purpose of the collaborative stakeholder structure is to form local, diverse, multi-stakeholder partnerships to foster long-term investments in the community's vision for transformation. The CSS should include local residents and community-based organizations, CBOs, and lead the governance and decision-making for the project. We also want to balance short-term and long-term needs, both during emergency and year-round programming to enhance community resilience. We also want to prioritize both vulnerable/priority populations, and lastly, to fund a mix of projects in terms of climate impacts, facility types and lead applicants, and geographic diversity spanning rural and urban communities, as well as incorporated and unincorporated lands. Now we're going to be talking about the core components. The CRC model is intentionally flexible to account for the vast spectrum of communities across California. Core components, however, include the following: a multi-stakeholder partnerships, which per statute must include local residents and community-based organizations in governance and decision-making. Robust, meaningful, and culturally appropriate community engagement through all phases: design, application, implementation, and evaluation. Capital projects, which refers to the physical infrastructure investments to the CRC facility itself and CRC campus amenities, like a bus stop or a community garden. Community resilience services and programs, referring to the social infrastructure investments in services and programs to ensure ongoing year-round usage of the CRC while strengthening of local community resilience. Equipped with these core components, community resilience centers will empower communities to respond to climate emergencies and provide year-round services programs to enhance both climate resilience and community resilience. Now we're going to talk about the priority populations and communities. First, the communities. All communities are eligible to apply for the CRC program. We are directed per statute to prioritize projects located and benefiting under-resourced communities, which is a set definition in state code. The map pictured here highlights all under-resourced communities in blue. We added language to make very clear that tribal lands, unincorporated communities, and rural communities that meet the definition of under-resourced communities qualify as priority communities for the CRC program. All applicants must discuss if and how the proposal considers, involves, impacts, and benefits priority communities. Now we're going to talk about the priority populations. In alignment with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, CalOS, and other state agencies, the CRC has identified the following priority populations: individuals with physical development or intellectual disabilities, individuals with chronic conditions or injuries, individuals with limited English proficiency, older adults, children and pregnant people, low income, unhoused, and or transportation disadvantaged and public transit dependent people. Each CRC purpose must identify, work with, and intentionally serve the needs of priority populations in the proposed neighborhood containing the CRC facility. Now we're going to go over the funding targets. We have two types of funding targets. To meet the statewide geographic diversity required by statute, the program commits to awarding at least one CRC grant, any grant type, to each of the Cal OES Fire and Rescue Mutual Aid regions. Here's a map of those 6 regions to the left. We also have a tribal funding target. We intend to fund a minimum of 5 qualifying tribally led CRC projects in round 1 across all grant types. I will now pass this on to Lisa to talk about the implementation grants.
Wonderful, thanks, Angel. So let's dig into those implementation grants. Wonderful. So the implementation grants, which we said is one of the 3 different grant types available from the Community Resilience Centers program. These are a great fit for applicants that already have an identified project site, local partners, and a plan to build both climate and community resilience, as Angel said. So here's some examples of what you can do with an implementation grant. Construct, retrofit, and or upgrade a proposed CRC facility, construct, improve, and or develop campus amenities near that proposed facility, purchase materials, administer, and fund staffing for services and programs based out of that proposed facility. We will note here that the implementation grant awards will range from $1 million to $10 million each. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So we do have 5 overall very high level program objectives for the CRC implementation grants. They're detailed here. The first is to offer multi-benefit physical community serving spaces that are resilient to current and future climate hazards. Second is to provide an integrated delivery of essential services and programming to support local communities, both during disasters, emergencies, and disruption events, and to address some ongoing community needs and build community cohesion. The third piece talks about integrating physical infrastructure projects with social infrastructure through community-driven partnerships and programming to increase climate resilience, expand economic opportunities, and reduce health, environmental, and social inequities across California. And 4 and 5, we get from another program, which are to 1, leverage and build a skilled, diversified, and trained workforce and promote local workforce development and training opportunities. And finally, to build, strengthen, and sustain local leadership and grassroots engagement in civic and community development and climate resilience awareness and activities. So very, very broad program objectives. Next slide, please. Wonderful. Let's talk about eligibility. So we intentionally are keeping eligible applicants and eligible facility types very, very expansive. The goal here is to be less prescriptive and much more flexible to acknowledge the different needs across communities. So in terms of eligible facility types, we are looking at community serving locations. CRCs will ultimately serve as resilience centers both during specific climate or emergency events, as well as provide some ongoing programming and community services year round. So examples of what those existing community serving locations could be. This is not limited to, but some examples can include the ones that are listed here. Schools, libraries, community and cultural centers, youth and or senior care centers, health clinics, places of worship, community colleges, food banks. It's a very, very long list. And so again, regardless of facility type, applicants must demonstrate how that specific facility serves or could serve that local community, both during emergency activations and year-round during non-emergency times. Wonderful. And CRC facilities and any of those campus amenities associated with that facility, they do need to be publicly accessible year-round. Applications can include existing facilities or new construction projects. And by completion of the CRC implementation grant award term, all CRC facilities must meet the CRC facility requirements that are detailed in our guidelines. So just to make this extra clear, if you're submitting more than one facility in an application for an implementation grant, each facility listed must meet the facility requirements by the end of the grant term, and they all must share the same owner. So feel free to ask more questions about that in our inbox, but wanted to make that one really clear. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So all applicants based in California are eligible and can include the following: California Native American tribes, coalitions or associations of nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations or CBOs, faith-based organizations and non-governmental organizations or NGOs, community development finance institutions or community development corporations, emergency management, response, preparedness, and recovery service providers and organizations, philanthropic organizations and foundations, private or nonprofit, private sector consultants, public entities, which can range across, institutions like schools and libraries, incorporated cities, counties, and unincorporated communities, some local regional public agencies and districts at the county level, which could include things like community choice aggregators, other kinds of special districts or joint powers authorities, councils of governments, and other forms of local government, and also small businesses. Wonderful. And we do want to flag that for some of those eligible applicant types, there are additional considerations. So if the lead applicant is a public agency, they must provide evidence of a past formal resolution in the CRC proposal that includes authorization to apply for and accept a CRC implementation grant and the authority to execute all the related documents if awarded. There are sample resolution letters available in the application itself on Submittable. If a public agency is a co-applicant, then that applicant must provide a letter of support from the public agency, again, in the proposal. And there's further guidance on this included in the application itself. If the lead applicant is a private entity, which can include private sector, consultants, private philanthropic organizations, other for-profit entities, that lead applicant must, one, partner with a community-based organization or a tribe that advances climate, racial, economic, or health justice and works with that specific community that the CRC intends to serve. They also need to submit a letter of recommendation from the community-based organizations or tribe detailing some history of interaction, collaboration, and outcomes. And finally, we want to note that state entities such as agencies, departments, commissions, offices, councils, and interstate compact entities are not eligible to apply as a lead applicant, but are eligible to apply as co-applicants. The University of California, or UC, and the California State University System, CSUs, are exempt from this guidance, and they can apply as the lead applicant where appropriate. Next slide, please. So it is required for all implementation grant applicants to form a collaborative stakeholder structure, forming localized place-based partnerships to ensure consistent buy-in and support, shared values and governance, and alleviation of existing power imbalances that may skew input and decisions, especially under time and resource constraints or emergency conditions. Collectively, that collaborative stakeholder structure will provide support for public engagement and drive decision-making throughout project implementation. The collaborative stakeholder structure is designed to overcome challenges inherent in the shared decision-making and to build robust local community governance over projects happening in residents' own neighborhoods. This is something we're required to do per statute. So the collaborative stakeholder structure will develop and submit one application. The CSS must involve, as I said, those multi-stakeholder partnerships, which have to include local governments and, local residents and community nominated members and CBOs. So the application will be evaluated on the degree to which each incorporates community leadership, especially in decisions like site selection, proposal development, project design, implementation, and evaluation. All implementation grant applicants are required to define a project area. That project area must encompass the CRC facility itself, any campus amenities connected to the CRC facility, and community resilience services and programs based out of the CRC facility. Those campus amenities must, one, be on the same parcel as the Resilience Center or an adjoining parcel of a CRC, or be located within a 1 mile radius of the CRC and along a route that is accessible to pedestrians and individuals using wheelchairs or other mobility devices, or accessible by vehicle by the end of the grant term. So applications that include more than one CRC facility must also explain how the separate facilities will serve distinct communities within their region. And we do want to note that transportation to and from the CRC may extend beyond the limits of that identified project area 1 mile radius I mentioned. And finally, tribal projects located on restricted fee lands must comply with the requirements of the jurisdiction on which the land is located. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So eligible activities under this grant type break down into 2 really broad categories. The first one is capital projects, which includes that CRC facility and the campus amenities. The CRC facility construction and retrofits refers to activities related to direct construction, retrofits, and other upgrades to the CRC facility itself, such as pre-construction, energy audits, direct construction costs, building rehabilitation. Those activities may also include development of some basic environmental infrastructure that will support the CRC facility, including water supply and wastewater service. Campus amenities are the activities related to construction or improvements to amenities located at the CRC facility that strengthen that local community's resilience to climate and or other disasters, such as installing rain gardens or planting shade trees. Community gardens is another topic people are interested in. The other big bucket is community resilience services and programs, which includes a wide range of activities that operate outside of the CRC facility that build community resilience and encourage year-round usage of the facility, in addition to use during emergency activations. So those services and programs funded by the CRC grant must be available to the public. The categories can broadly be sorted into things like health and well-being, emergency preparedness and response, access and mobility, information distribution, housing affordability and protection, and workforce development. We've included a non-exhaustive list of example eligible activities in Appendix D of our guidelines that you can review for further ideas. And I will now pass to Jess to cover the strategies.
Thanks, Lisa. I will now cover the strategies. So to achieve the CRC Implementation Grant Program objectives, each CRC proposal must include at least 4 of the strategies listed here. These strategies are modeled from other SGC programs, integrated robust stakeholder input, and intentionally bridge both the physical infrastructure and social infrastructure. This approach is intended to provide local communities maximum flexibility to self-determine and thoughtfully select strategies that best meet that local context, priorities, and needs. The example activities listed under each strategy in the guidelines are intended to illustrate the overall logic of the 7 strategies, demonstrate how each strategy encompasses both the physical infrastructure and social infrastructure activities, and model a comprehensive and holistic approach to both climate resilience and community resilience. Each activity must be based at or out of the CRC facility and or CRC campus. I will note the list of examples in the guidelines are non-exhaustive, and while the following slides on each strategy offer some examples, we encourage you to review all of the strategies and associated example activities in section 5.3, implementation strategies of the final guidelines, starting on page 18. So this first strategy is energy resilience. The goal here is to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to prepare for and withstand energy-related disruptions, improve overall energy efficiency, and provide energy access and resources to local community during emergency activations and year-rounds. Some examples of capital project activities are solar photovoltaic PV installation and associated roof upgrade costs, islanded microgrids and renewable energy generation and storage, energy infrastructure, energy efficient upgrades in building, including windows and ceiling upgrades, battery storage, fuel switching, and appliance electrification and associated electrical upgrade costs. Some examples of community resilience services and programs for energy resilience are flyer distribution of energy rebate programs, case management and enrollment of community members in weatherization and energy assistance programs, or information on programs like medical baseline, if applicable. The second strategy is water resilience, to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to prepare for and withstand water-related disruptions, to improve overall water efficiency, and to provide water access to local community during emergency activations and year-rounds. Here are some examples of capital project activities. Those can be water efficiency and appliance upgrades like low flow toilets, urinals, dishwashers, showers, and laundry facilities, water filtration, purification, or well water filtering, replacement of on-site vegetation with low water uses and drought-resistant landscaping and irrigation systems, low impact development measures. This could be rain gardens, rain barrels, rain catchment systems, and permeable pavements. And then some examples of the community resilience services and programs for this strategy are culturally and linguistically appropriate education and materials around water purification, water conservation, and drought-resistant activities, case management and enrollment support for rebate or financial support programs relating to low water or low impact development improvements. The third strategy here is air quality and public health. This is to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to provide clean air during emergency activations and year-round, to equip the local community with resources, information, and trainings on public health and extreme weather conditions, including extreme heat, and then lastly, to support the social cohesion and community resilience. So capital project activity examples include filtration upgrades to heating, ventilation, and cooling, or HVAC systems, HVAC system replacement, air filtration and purification appliances, outdoor cooling solutions, etc. For the community resilient services and program activity examples, you can have a culturally and linguistically appropriate education on heat stroke and other heat-related illnesses, hypothermia, other cold-related illnesses, programs tracking indoor and outdoor air quality, asthma, and other public health impacts, community and cultural meetings focused on building local social cohesion and community trust, and peer support networks and services to increase social cohesion and connectedness. The fourth strategy is nature-based solutions and food security to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to provide food during emergency activations and year-round, to develop or strengthen nature-based solutions to mitigate climate impacts, and to provide resources, information, and trainings for the local community members on nature-based solutions and healthy foods. So capital project activity examples here could be urban forestry and community breeding, vegetation management, permeable surfaces, conversion to climate smart landscaping, land acquisition for defensible space and nature-based solutions, including outdoor recreation, community gardens, and localized food production, commercial kitchen, food processing, refrigeration and storage, and livestock grazing and open space. Community resilient services and programs here include cooking and gardening classes, wildfire management trainings, climate smart landscaping education, resources and trainings on maintenance of defensible space around homes, and agricultural and healthy food educational opportunities for children and community members. The fifth strategy is emergency preparedness and critical communications to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to prepare for and withstand emergency activations, to develop and strengthen the local critical communications infrastructure and networks, and to provide local community with resources, information, and trainings for emergencies and critical communications. So capital project activity examples here are seismic retrofits to CRC facility, or the installation of broadband and critical communication services and associated upgrades. Some examples of community resilience services and program activities could be community emergency response team and first aid trainings, community-led emergency management, response and recovery planning and functions, disaster and evacuation planning and education, food, water, personal protective equipment, and disaster preparedness kit distribution. And then the sixth strategy is mobility and access. This is to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to serve local community members, particularly priority populations, effectively and adequately during emergency activations and year-round. Also to develop or strengthen accessible transportation options to the CRC facility, and then lastly, to enhance the mobility options for local communities. Capital project activity examples here include public transit service extension connected to the CRC facility, a bus stop addition, mobile units and shuttle for access and functional needs communities or our priority populations, especially older adults, people with disabilities, and transit-dependent community members. It could include the purchase and maintenance of electric vehicle EV fleet that is wheelchair, motorized, scooter accessible, and based at the CRC facility, an EV charging infrastructure, and closing the gaps in bike and pedestrian network within 1 mile of the CRC facility through bike lanes or sidewalks. Some examples of community resilience services and program activities here include the development of flexible transit services and programs, including paratransit and van pools, micro-mobility programs. This could be a bike or electric bike share, culturally and linguistically appropriate trainings on electric vehicles, car share use, bicycle use and enrollment, and safety education programs for active transportation. And then here is our last strategy, our workforce development, education, and training. The goal here is to build or enhance the CRC's capacity to provide local workforce development trainings, develop and provide workforce opportunities, and support relevant to local community members' strengths, priorities, and needs, and equip local communities with increased access to leadership and advocacy, civic engagement, job and careers, and other economic opportunities. So the capital project activity examples here are construction and renovation of classrooms and/or training areas for specific workforce training programs, and the purchase and maintenance of computer labs. Some examples of community resilient services and programs here can be trainings on outdoor workers' rights and protections, especially during poor air quality and extreme heat events, general education development test, the GED, solar installation and other certification programs based at the CRC facility, local training programs like community health worker certification programs, classes and networking for contractors and other workers, and CRC facility equipment trainings, including broadband maintenance to build that local staffing capacity. So here, those were all of the strategies included, but as a reminder, each implementation grant proposal must include 4 of the 7 strategies. I will now pass to Dora to talk about our project requirements.
Thanks, Jess. Perfect. So all CRC projects must involve a physical building. The CRC program cannot fund upgrades only to an outdoor space. And although improvements to an outdoor space may be eligible in combination with the physical CRC facility, like a local community center, that physical building must be a component. So the rest of these project requirements that I'll cover in the next few slides will be the required features and functions that must be met by the conclusion of the CRC implementation grant award terms. However, it's important to keep these in mind as components of our application do ask about these requirements to ensure applicant understanding and to ensure that applicants will be able to meet these requirements if awarded. The next few slides will also contain several features and functions, some that are asterisked. We wanted to ensure that applicants understood why that is. So for projects located in rural communities for whom the following requirements present a hardship, they may request a modification with justification for those asterisk functions or features below. In these cases, applicants must name the asterisk function or feature, provide context for the specific hardship, propose a relevant and feasible modification, and submit a request to staff. Staff will review such requests on a case-by-case basis. One such example that we'll explore in just a moment might be, for example, broadband connectivity in rural communities, which may really depend on external factors beyond the scope of an applicant's control. So a relevant and feasible modification to the broadband requirement could include high-speed internet access in the CRC facility by the end of grant term, in addition to purchase and or maintenance of hotspots, satellite, and ham radios, phone trees, and provision of computer access and digital literacy trainings and resources that are at the CRC facility. Okay, next slide, please. So the following are facility functions that must be met, of course, by the end of the grant term. All CRCs must be open and accessible to the public and offer community resilience services and programs year-round to community members. They must be able to be activated 7 days per week for heat waves and other climate emergencies that do not require overnight sheltering. And for larger scale climate emergencies that do require overnight shelter services, the CRC must be able to either be activated to provide that overnight shelter 24/7 during a larger scale climate emergency, or be able to coordinate transport of community members to an identified nearby evacuation shelter. So next we'll go a little bit into the overnight shelter requirements. So CRCs that will provide the overnight shelter during disasters must demonstrate ability to meet the following functions. So space and facilities needed for people to sleep, pet sheltering, food distribution or space for food preparation and storage, showers and ADA compliant showers, refrigeration for medicines, laundry, and portable restrooms in the event of water disruptions. Now, these functions can be met either through inclusion of them at the site on-site at the CRC facility itself, or inclusion of these functions through pre-identified and planned local partnerships that will provide these services at a nearby site or through portable options brought in during an emergency. All proposed CRC project components will be subject to all applicable local, state, and federal codes and regulations necessary to enable their use for the purposes listed. Facilities that are owned or operated by public entities must include the public agency on the application or provide a letter of commitment to enter into an executed agreement with that public agency for the completion of the facility upgrades for which funding is sought by the time the grant agreement is signed. Next slide, please. So next we'll dive in a little bit on our facility features. The facility serving as a resilience center should have capabilities and features that enable the site to be activated for a range of climate and other emergencies. These include ADA compliant facilities, gender neutral restrooms, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, so HVAC systems, air filtration systems of MERV 13 at minimum, broadband access, backup power generation and our battery storage, device charging capabilities for cell phones, personal communications devices, medical devices, power wheelchairs, and other assistive devices and technology, and drinking water stored on site with a plan for that resupply. Applicants should also consider facility elements that encourage social cohesion, service delivery, and disaster preparedness, such as conference rooms, childcare spaces, computer labs, medical facilities, resources, outdoor spaces, classrooms, and outdoor spaces for community programming. In terms of our provision of services and use of the CRC, the facility must remain dedicated to use as a community resilience center for a minimum of 15 years. All awarded applicants will be required to produce either a recorded deed restriction or a memorandum of unrecorded grant agreement by the end of the grant term. This will apply to both leased and owned facilities. Grantees must offer services and programs through the end of the grant term. Applicants and partners must provide draft CRC emergency plans and year-round community resilience plans upon the time of application. There are instructions for these draft plans in the application on Submittable, which include a downloadable document that each applicant should use. This document includes a series of questions for the draft emergency plan that must be answered, and the second component of that document includes further direction and examples for the year-round community resilience plan. Once awarded, grantees and partners will continue to develop their plans, and finished CRC emergency plans and year-round community resilience plans are due by the end of the CRC implementation grant award term. So here's a little bit of more information around our CRC emergency plans. So of course, the draft CRC emergency plans must contain detail on the processes and procedures that will take place to activate the CRC facility in response to an emergency, to provide weather respite and our overnight emergency shelter applicable, and how to evacuate the facility if there is an imminent emergency or hazard. These should also align with local relevant emergency planning documents, including the general plan safety element, local hazard mitigation plan, and our county emergency operations plan at a minimum. As mentioned, these are kind of provided through our downloadable document as it's guided through a series of questions that should be answered. So completed CRC emergency plans will be due at the end of the grant term as mentioned and must include the following components: emergency communications plan with a focus on priority populations, energy resilience plan for backup power during emergencies and renewable energy generation, mobility plan to transport community members to and from the CRC facility, as well as alignment with or connection to identified accessible evacuation routes, how applicants will work with relevant emergency response organizations, including but not limited to the jurisdiction's Office of Emergency Services, local hospitals or other healthcare providers, utility operators, and social services and volunteer agencies that provide direct service relief. Agreements and processes that ensure that the CRC will be able to be activated in the case of an emergency must also be included. So things around triggers for emergency situations, processes for activating the center during an emergency, and defined roles and responsibilities of the different organizations involved. A procedure must also be outlined for receiving and swiftly resolving requests for reasonable modifications or accommodation from people with disabilities, resolving any uncertainty in favor of accessibility. All plans must specifically consider how they will serve priority populations and other community members. Plans should also consider any anticipated growth in population or density in the communities the CRC will serve, including accounting for population growth due to planned housing development. Plans should detail any existing or planned shared use agreements for use of the CRC facility by any organization, including disaster-related relief groups and any local, state, federal, or tribal agency in the case of a disaster. CRCs must coordinate with their county office of emergency services or the relevant departments responsible for emergency management and planning for that county to determine procedures for emergency activation. This coordination will be a required and ongoing component throughout the CRC implementation grant term. At the time of application, applicants must demonstrate that they have sent a notice of intent to apply to the county that the CRC is located in. This is already sort of embedded into our submittable process, so you can see that there. All that is required for CRCs where the county is not a lead applicant or co-applicant is a copy of a communication sent notifying the relevant county Office of Emergency Services office of the intent to apply for this grant. By the end of the grant term for CRCs where the county is not a lead applicant or co-applicant, grantees will be required to submit signed letters of commitment or memorandums of understanding with county entities detailing emergency activation procedures for the CRC or that identifies the CRC as a shelter resource in a county developed emergency operations plan document. In the case that a grantee is unable to provide a letter of commitment, SGC staff will provide a letter of commitment or an MOU or MOA. SGC staff will maintain the ability to field requests for alternative means of demonstrating compliance with this requirement. And also just wanted to note here that projects located on tribal trust land will not be required to coordinate with County Office of Emergency Services. So in terms of our CRC year-round community resilience plan, applicants and partners must provide, of course, a draft of this at the time of application, outlining proposed partners, strategies, and activities to ensure that the CRCs are used year-round and not only during emergencies. Likely components here include services and programs, community events and trainings, and other related activities to ensure that the CRC facility functions as a community serving location. Okay, so next we'll cover a little bit on program evaluation. CRC implementation grantees must each work with a third-party independent program evaluator to provide project-related data. In partnership with SGC staff, the evaluator will develop a statewide program evaluation framework and work with grantees to identify indicators for tracking and monitoring for their projects. Once an overall CRC program evaluation framework is developed, in partnership with SGC and grantees, the evaluator will produce templates to grantees. The evaluation will seek to provide specific measurable outcomes achieved by the program that will provide lessons learned and potential recommendations for overall program improvement and insights for future CRC funding rounds, as well as related climate resilience and community resilience funding opportunities. Given CRC program design and objectives, the evaluator will also closely assess ability to serve priority communities statewide and priority populations at the neighborhood scale. SGC staff will ensure the evaluator only collects and shares information and data as appropriate while respecting confidentiality and sensitivity of demographic information. The CRC program evaluator may also support grantees on some reporting, administrative, and communications activities as appropriate. At minimum, CRC program outcomes and evaluation will be reported to SGC staff, the SGC Council, and the legislature. The program evaluation will consider at minimum the impact on climate resilience and the impact on community resilience. Metrics will be collected on usage of the Community Resilience Center in assessing impact of both climate resilience and community resilience. Grantees will need to provide CRC facility usage information. This may include, but is not limited to, how many people visit the CRC facility, general information on county of residence, the purpose for attending, and the resources utilized. Usage data will examine CRC facility usage year-round, as well as during disruptions and disasters such as drought, earthquakes, extreme temperatures, flooding, sea level rise, wildfires, and others. And here are a few of the ineligible costs for implementation grants. Indirect costs in excess of 12% of the awarded CRC funds, with the exception of federally recognized Native American tribes who may use the indirect cost rate negotiated with the federal government. Expenses and activities incurred outside the term of the grant award. We are unable to use CRC funds to pay for fossil fuel powered appliances and infrastructure like diesel generators or gas powered appliances. We also cannot use CRC funds to supplant other committed funds for any part of the proposal. While many engagement related costs like food, childcare, and transportation costs are eligible costs, we cannot pay for the following outreach costs. These include direct cash benefits, subsidies, or participant incentives. We also cannot pay for projects without long-term operations and maintenance plans. You can find a full list of ineligible costs in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines, Section 7.1, Eligible and Ineligible Costs, which is located on page 35. Next, I'll go ahead and pass to Coral to cover the cost breakdowns.
Thanks so much, Dora. Great. So starting off here with indirect costs. Indirect costs can account for up to 12% of the total CRC implementation grant award. This indirect cost applies to all entities, including University of California and California State University entities, again, except for federally recognized Native American tribes, which can use the indirect cost rate negotiated with the federal government. And just to kind of provide a broad definition, these are costs that aren't directly tied to the grant, but are necessary for the general operation of the organization. So some examples include personnel costs associated with administrative, supervisory, legal, or executive staff, personnel costs associated with other support units like clerical support or housekeeping, and operating expenses and equipment costs that aren't included as part of direct project costs. So thinking about things like accounting, budgeting, audits, business services, information technology, rent, utilities, supplies, etc. Documentation related to the determination of the grantee's indirect cost rate has to be retained by the grantee for audit purposes. So if you are awarded, documenting the indirect cost rate will be required. Next slide, please. So the next cost category is direct implementation costs. These are costs that are directly tied to implementation of the grant, including but not limited to personnel costs for project management and grant administration, labor, subcontracts, equipment costs, travel expenses, and translation and interpretation costs. Direct implementation costs include funding for implementation of both the capital projects, so the facility and campus amenities, as well as community resilience services and programs. And then a note to make sure to budget an appropriate amount for grant administration, which includes grant invoicing and reporting. So first, capital projects. The requirement around this for the implementation grants is that any costs related to the CRC facility construction and or retrofits, as well as campus amenities, counts as a capital project. And a minimum of 51% of the grant award has to be spent on capital projects. In addition to construction and other direct implementation costs, funding for capital projects also includes pre-development and basic infrastructure costs. For more detail on that, please take a look at section 7.2 cost breakdowns in our final guidelines. Those start on page 37, the examples of pre-development and basic infrastructure costs. And then we have community resilience services and programs. Those are costs related to the services and programs that build community resilience to climate and other disasters. Next slide, please. The next eligible cost category is costs related to the development and administration of engagement and outreach activities to support grant implementation. There's a pretty broad set of eligible community engagement and outreach costs that are eligible under the grant. There's a full list on this slide, but some of the ones I'll highlight verbally are: 1, materials developed for outreach events, trainings, and other grant activities, facilitation for meetings, translation and interpretation services for meetings and written materials, participant compensation, that's an exchange of payment for services rendered in the development of community work products. So I know that's a little wonky, but basically what that means is that you can pay community members for their participation in grant implementation, which in this case is their contributions to meetings regarding implementation of the grant. These do need to be documented in some way, for example, with sign-in sheets or written surveys. Also of note are transportation stipends and transportation services for community members to be able to attend engagement events, rental costs of equipment, facilities, and venues, childcare for community residents at community engagement events to make sure that folks can come and attend. Their kids are going to be watched over while they're there contributing to the meeting. And then food and refreshments if they're an integral part of the event. So an example is if you're holding a community workshop in the evening where the meal is provided and eaten as part of the event and replaces a meal otherwise missed by attending the event. So if you're holding a workshop at dinner time and you're providing dinner because otherwise folks would be missing that, that is eligible. And then just to reiterate what Dora shared earlier on ineligible costs, engagement costs like a cash prize at the door or a raffle are not eligible through the program. Next slide, please. So implementation grant applicants will also need to set aside a minimum of 3% of the total budget for evaluation costs. The amount should be decided depending on the existing capacity of applicants to participate in evaluation activities, including coordinating with a third-party evaluator that SGC will be bringing on board to collect and report data. That structure is not fully set up yet, so we just want to make sure that that minimum percentage is set aside so that you are able to dedicate budget without having to reallocate budget from other project costs to engage in evaluation activities. Great. So now we're going to dive into the 5 different components of threshold requirements for CRC implementation grants. This includes community engagement and outreach, the partnership agreement and or the memorandum of understanding, site readiness requirements, applicant capacity, which includes management and financial capacity, and the long-term use of the CRC facility. And a note before we dive into these that upon submission of the full application, each application has to meet all thresholds to advance from the program threshold screen onto the interagency review panel. Some of the ones that I'll talk about here are required during the grant term, so those you can have more time on, but the ones that are required at the time of application have to be submitted in order for us to even score your application. Next slide, please. So first, community engagement. You will need to be able to demonstrate how community residents and community-based organizations informed project proposals and selected the project area, as well as how they'll remain engaged throughout the project design, application, implementation, and evaluation. So to ensure that the funds that we're giving out benefit under-resourced communities, you will be required to directly engage community members and stakeholders in this process. So more specifically, you will need to involve residents, organizations, and businesses from the project area and key stakeholders in the region or just in general in all phases of proposal development and implementation. Proposals should be designed to meet residents' needs that are identified through an outreach and engagement process. You will also need to tailor community engagement to that local community through partnerships with local community-based organizations. We require that applicants use proven methods of engagement to facilitate direct participation of community residents. This includes best practices like translating meetings and materials, scheduling meetings at times that are convenient to community members, and engaging community members in information gathering as well as in outreach. Appendix C of our guidelines includes a pretty detailed list of best practices around community engagement that we really encourage you to take a look at. Next slide, please. So all applicants will need to submit a partnership agreement that is co-developed by the lead applicant and all co-applicants that describes the governance, organization, and financial relationships of the collaborative stakeholder structure. This can be submitted as an unsigned draft. And again, this will need to include any of the entities in the collaborative stakeholder structure, including community residents and other community-based organizations, even if they're not an official co-applicant to your project. If awarded, SGC may request changes to the terms of the partnership agreement during the post-award consultation process. The partnership agreement will need to be executed before the grant agreement is signed between SGC and the lead applicant. And another important note is that the collaborative stakeholder structure will need to govern implementation of the entire CRC grant, even if there are multiple sites in the application. Although in that case, specific partners that are operating at each site may vary. So to give an example, say your application has 2 distinct facilities in different areas. You will still need to have one collaborative stakeholder structure, but maybe the service or program providers operating out of each facility are distinct based on that specific community's needs. That is totally fine. Applicants whose project area crosses municipal boundaries, federally recognized tribal territory boundaries, or other jurisdictional boundaries is required to submit a draft memorandum of understanding that outlines how all public agencies and tribal governments who collectively have jurisdiction over the project area will manage the grant. One important thing to note is that applicants can either submit an MOU that's separate from the required partnership agreement that outlines that collaborative stakeholder structure and the governance of it, or you can submit an all-encompassing MOU that defines the governance structure for both the project area with multiple jurisdictions and the collaborative stakeholder structure. Next slide, please. So getting into site readiness, there's a pretty hefty list of readiness requirements for implementation grants, which I'll go over on the following few slides. Readiness requirements do need to be complete prior to beginning project implementation, unless otherwise specified. Again, some of them are occurring during the grant term. Projects will be very carefully vetted during the application review process to ensure that readiness status is accurately reflected in application materials. And additional documents may be requested of applicants in advance of awards if we still have questions about any of these. Next slide, please. Great. So all applicants need to be able to demonstrate that environmental review will be completed within the first year of the grant term. So not by time of application, but within the first year of the grant term. Before submitting the application, though, applicants should consult with a public agency or agencies that have permitting authority over the projects in the application to determine what is required to comply with CEQA. For projects that meet the readiness requirements at the time of application, the applicant and/or co-applicants need to demonstrate and provide documentation showing that the project is CEQA compliant. And then for projects that will be ready within the first year of the grant term, applicants will need to report on the project's CEQA status and demonstrate that environmental review will be completed within the first year of the grant term. So you still need to submit some documentation there. Next slide, please. So for projects that are exempt from CEQA, you can provide us, or you need to provide us with a notice of exemption that has been approved by the appropriate body pursuant to the obligations under CEQA, or documentation that the project is CEQA compliant. So for example, this might look like a resolution that's been adopted by the local government that has permitting authority confirming that the project is exempt. If that's not possible, we would also accept meeting minutes documenting the consideration and approval of the project's CEQA compliance. It could also look like a signed letter or similar document from the head of an approving entity, for example, from a planning director. A file stamped notice of determination will be required for all other projects. And then taking a look at the statutes of limitation, SGC will notify grantees that you can begin work on a project once all readiness requirements have been met, including CEQA completion. However, projects are still subject to statutes of limitation for any legal challenges, which vary depending on the type of CEQA filing and whether CEQA filing occurs. Importantly, grantees will need to notify SGC when the statutes of limitation have lapsed for each project and if any legal challenges are arising. Next slide, please. So applicants need to, there are a few on this slide. I'll just go in order. So starting with site control, applicants need to be able to demonstrate site control to demonstrate readiness prior to implementation. If you want to establish facilities or expand existing facilities on property that you don't currently own, you need to provide a legally binding commitment or letters of commitment to sell that clearly states the ownership or leasehold interests of the parties. We have in Appendix E a list of options for how you can demonstrate site control to SGC. Encourage folks to take a look at that if you are uncertain if you have site control over your project. Project site analysis. So applicants will need to conduct a project site analysis demonstrating the road capacity around the proposed CRC project site, a land use analysis for compatibility, or an existing planning document that identifies the potential sites for these uses, such as a community-specific plan. And then it should also include a consultation with emergency service providers about site location, particularly with a focus on emergency ingress and egress to that site. Moving on to permits. At the time of application, applicants will need to identify all of the permits that are required to implement all of the proposed components of the application, and that you can obtain those permits within the grant term. And then finally for this slide, financial feasibility. You will need to demonstrate that the project is financially feasible. So you can do this through documentation like a market study, a project pro forma, a sources and uses statement, a proposed operating budget, a multi-year pro forma, or other feasibility documentation that you have. Next slide, please. So for the project schedule, for each capital project, you'll need to provide a baseline project schedule prior to implementation of that component or project. This should include project activities and durations and needs to be broken down in sufficient detail to manage the work. Moving on to the facility conditions assessment. So prior to signing the grant agreement, all applicants whose proposal includes an existing facility, so not a new construction project, but existing facilities, must provide a facility condition assessment that has been conducted by a licensed professional that provides an overview of the current condition of building systems and structures, costs of a repair or replacement of any of those systems or structures, costs associated with replacement of building components as they degrade, the expected useful life of building systems and structures, and recurring probable expenditures. We strongly encourage applicants to conduct this assessment prior to application, but if you need additional time, you can have until the signing of the grant agreement to submit a completed assessment. However, if a facility condition assessment that is conducted after the application is submitted finds building systems or structures in need of repair or replacement that haven't been accounted for in your original project budget, if you're recommended for award, you will be required to reallocate funding from another component of your proposal to cover the cost of those identified repairs or replacements. For more information on what those assessments need to look at, please take a look at the Facility Conditions Assessment Appendix G in the final guidelines. And then finalizing with some other requirements in here, applicants need to submit additional documentation that will kind of demonstrate readiness to implement capital projects. So first, construction cost estimates that have been created by a third party that gives cost estimates for the total proposed capital projects cost. Then facility floor plans that detail space for features that have been identified in the proposal, for example, seating or storage of emergency supplies or battery storage space for that in the facility. And then Finally, operations and maintenance plan, which has to detail indebtedness for all properties included in the CRC application. There is an operations and maintenance plan template that is provided in the application on Submittable, along with follow-up narrative questions. So you don't have to generate something separately. That will count. That downloadable template, you'll need to fill it out and answer the required questions. And that's what we were considering the plan for this application. We may also request additional documentation to assess site readiness overall and feasibility during the application review period. All capital projects will need to align with any applicable local or regional plans and regulations, as well as just an important note there. And then finally in this category, resolution. So in the case that the lead applicant is a public agency, they will need to provide evidence of a past formal resolution in the CRC proposal that includes an authorization to apply for and accept a CRC implementation grant and the delegated authority to execute all related documents if awarded. And again, this only applies to public agencies. And there are sample resolution letters available in the application itself on Submittable if you want to take a look at examples of what others have done for other grant programs. Next slide, please. So moving on to the next kind of category in the threshold section, applicant capacity. Applicants will need to provide sufficient information to us to demonstrate their management and financial capacity. Lead and co-applicants will need to demonstrate the ability to oversee, manage, and implement large infrastructure projects. So starting out with management capacity, to demonstrate management capacity, the lead and co-applicants will need to identify the lead applicant or co-applicant responsible for leading the implementation of each capital project or activity. Also, we'll need to provide evidence of the lead entity or co-applicant having successfully implemented a similar project in scope and size in California within the last 10 years. You will need to describe the full or part-time staff that will be dedicated to CRC program implementation. And then finally, to provide a letter of support from one reference who can speak to the quality and timeliness of work completed by the lead or co-applicant. Another note here is that applicants should dedicate enough staff to implementing the CRC project, including capacity for grant administration and coordination, depending on the size and complexity of the project. And then for financial capacity, lead applicants and co-applicants need to demonstrate the financial capacity to adhere to the reimbursement processes of the program and as defined by the partnership agreement that is submitted. There's more information on the reimbursement process in section 10.4 of the guidelines, and we'll also cover more on that when we go over grant administration later in this presentation. Applicants, both the lead and the co-applicants will need to provide a current annual organizational budget and recent financial statements as well, and that has space in the application where you will be specifically asked for that. And then nonprofit organizations will need to submit a copy of your most recent federal Form 990 and a copy of the organization's IRS 501c3 tax determination letter. If the lead or any of the co-applicants has had an audit finding in the last 5 years, they will need to enclose it in the application in an official letter. If you have not had an audit finding in the last 5 years, you do not need to submit anything there. Next slide, please. And then finally, wrapping up our threshold section, applicants will need to provide a legally binding document by the end of the second year of the grant term, so not at the time of application, but the second year of the grant term, that demonstrates that the facility will remain dedicated to use as a community resilience center for a minimum of 15 years after project implementation is complete. Applicants will need to either provide a recorded deed restriction or a memorandum of unrecorded grant agreement, or a MUGA. Leased facilities will need to provide both a copy of the lease and a signed letter of commitment from the landowner that gives permission to both develop the proposed project as well as to provide long-term maintenance as applicable. So with that, I will pass to Lisa to talk about the application.
Wonderful. Thanks, Coral. So let's talk about the implementation grant application itself. So to zoom back out, all CRC grants will be evaluated and awarded through a statewide competitive process. Full applications will be submitted electronically via Submittable. And later in this video, we'll be doing a demo of getting to understand the Submittable platform. And we do want to flag another reminder, all applications and submitted materials will be treated in accordance with the Public Records Act, or PRA, requirements. So certain information will be subject to those requirements and might be publicly disclosed if requested. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So CRC implementation grants are going to employ a two-phase application process, which includes a pre-proposal phase, which we'll talk about here, and a full application phase. The intent of the two-phase application process is to try and respond to community asks to decrease the application burden on applicants, to offer input and guidance earlier in the application process, and to ensure promising projects invest in a full application process with necessary support or guidance from staff. So submitting a pre-proposal for a CRC implementation grant is required in order to submit a full application. And we will flag that implementation grant pre-proposals must be submitted through the Microsoft form, which is available on our website and materials. So more on that in a moment. So for the pre-proposal phase, one eligible entity will submit a CRC implementation pre-proposal, just similar to this concept paper, describing the proposed CRC implementation project on behalf of their collaborative stakeholder structure. CRC program staff will then screen the pre-proposals on a rolling basis and provide high-level feedback, but no scores. That feedback may include recommendations to pursue an alternative CRC grant type or funding round, or to strengthen work on certain program thresholds. That being said, applicants are not required to follow staff recommendations and can apply to any grant type. So perhaps the pre-proposal feedback from staff includes a suggestion to pursue another grant type given timing. You can ignore that feedback and still proceed towards a full application for an implementation grant. The feedback from staff is meant to be helpful and to equip applicants with the information to really make their own decisions. Applicants are not beholden to project details submitted in the pre-proposal for your full application. And then two other quick notes on the pre-proposal. One is that there's a priority deadline for pre-proposals as August 4. This deadline is to encourage applicants to submit pre-proposals to our program team earlier to receive feedback earlier. Applicants do not receive additional points or preferential treatment by submitting by this priority deadline. The benefit is receiving program staff feedback earlier to give you more time to decide if you want to proceed to the full application stage. The pre-proposal deadline is August 25, and that is to ensure program staff have sufficient time to provide feedback and to ensure that applicants have sufficient time to consider that feedback before advancing to a full application. And again, that pre-proposal is required for all implementation grants, and it must be submitted via Microsoft Forms. Next slide, please. Great. So the full application for implementation grants must be developed in partnership with other co-applicants through that collaborative stakeholder structure we've discussed. CRC program staff will first evaluate those full application proposals using the program thresholds that are outlined in our guidelines. And those program thresholds are based on eligibility and the CRC program requirements. So that's a lot of what Coral covered earlier. Applicants will then have a brief window to resubmit any missing information that's flagged by CRC program staff. If an applicant's unable to meet program thresholds, that proposal will not proceed to the next step of the review process. If a proposal meets all the program thresholds, then CRC program staff and an interagency review panel will evaluate the proposal using the scoring criteria that are outlined in our guidelines. Applicants will receive a single score out of 200 points after all of the deliberations. Staff will recommend awards based on those scores to our council. And if relevant, staff will also coordinate with some top scoring applicants for things like virtual interviews, maybe site visits, facility assessments, depending on the situation. Those elements will also be scored. So based on that interagency review and recommendations on the applications and those interviews or additional stages, staff will finalize and prepare award recommendations to present to the SGC council members for final approval. Those final funding decisions will be subject to programmatic considerations, including diversity of project types and geographic locations, including but not limited to a variety of climate impacts, representation from rural and urban, incorporated and unincorporated communities. And you might recall we have some funding targets that we talked about earlier on as well. And the Strategic Growth Council will make final awards at a council meeting. Next slide, please. So let's talk about that pre-proposal phase in a little bit more detail. So instead of a concept paper, as noted here on this slide, we're actually requesting the same information through an online form via Microsoft Forms, but it includes the same information. So it'll include narrative description of that proposed CRC site and facility, those campus amenities, services, and programs. We'd love to hear your proposed partners, your overall vision, things like that. We do ask for confirmation of receipt of CRC Implementation Grant preliminary thresholds on a checklist. So that details a lot of the required thresholds by the time of full application submission in September, by year 1 and 2 of grant term, and by the end of the grant term. So it's a lot of what Coral and Dora were covering later on or earlier on. And then there's also a component around technical assistance, noting that anticipating to try and guide our team as we were making technical assistance decisions. But as of this recording, we are currently oversubscribed for application TA, unfortunately. So if that is something you're excited about, please still reach out to our team and or attend virtual office hours. But right now that looks oversubscribed. On the full application phase, that completed application is online via the Submittable platform. That full application is going to include some of the following: information on your local community and residents, especially priority communities, priority populations, other vulnerable residents, a summary of the local climate risks, exposures, adaptation resilience measures, summary of local community resilience, so very in line with the point of the program, right? We want to hear a summary of community engagement to date, including descriptions of type, quality, depth, methods, previous data or work, developing a plan, and at least 4 CRC strategies within the project area and how they will advance community identified priorities, especially for those local priority populations. And then, as Dora mentioned earlier, we will also request a draft emergency plan and a draft year-round community resilience plan. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So in addition to the completed application, a lead applicant must also submit the following on this slide. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, so hopefully folks can just look at that there. And you can see a list of full application components on the implementation grants in the CRC Round 1 Final Guidelines in section 9.2 application components starting on page 52. So I'm going to stop here. Feel free to screenshot this slide as an informal checklist or as a guide as you reference and as you're developing and submitting your application materials. So with that, I will actually pass to Dora to zoom in on the scoring criteria.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. Next, thank you. So the CRC implementation grant proposals will be scored out of a total of 200 points according to the following criteria. The vision, thank you. The first section is vision and objectives. This is 20 points total. The project area must be clearly defined and sites must be identified and comply with other program requirements. The vision statement reflects CRC implementation program objectives and approach, and the CRC strategies and proposed activities must effectively advance all CRC implementation grant program objectives. You can see here the breakdown of points. For the community profile and community engagement section, this is worth a total of 40 points. There must be a clear and compelling description of community engagement to date, and proposed community engagement plan for the grant term. There is a community engagement plan template that is in the application of Submittable. And this section should especially focus on outreach, engagement, and improved outcomes for priority communities and priority populations. And the capacity and partnerships section, this is worth a total of 40 points. So this is really about ensuring that the lead applicant has financial and organizational capacity to manage the grant, and that there is evidence of strong, effective multi-stakeholder partnerships secured in the collaborative stakeholder structure through the draft partnership agreement and or the memorandum of understanding. Capacity and partnerships are the additional points here. So you can see that there's 5 total. The CRC program will award the following additional points to proposals, including the following for a collaborative stakeholder structure. So 1 point, proposals where the lead applicant is a California Native American tribe, an eligible entity having co-ownership with a California Native American tribe, or an eligible entity established by a California Native American tribe to undertake climate resilience projects. 1 point can be awarded for proposals that include a California Native American tribe or tribal communities in the collaborative stakeholder structure. They must demonstrate their role in the collaborative stakeholder structure governance and in decision-making. 1 point can be awarded for proposals that include in their collaborative stakeholder structure at least 1 partner with experience relevant to priority populations. Experience here includes lived experience from a priority population. You can see the full list in our section in guidelines on priority communities and priority populations. And the next 1 point for proposals that include in their collaborative stakeholder structure at least 1 partner with expertise serving priority populations. Expertise can include subject matter expertise, professional expertise like advocacy, and or providing direct services and programs. And the last bullet point here, 1 point for proposals that include in their collaborative stakeholder structure at least 1 partner with expertise on any of the following elements from program objectives. So local leadership and grassroots engagement, civic and community development, and climate resilience awareness and activities. So project impact is worth 65 points total. 20 points are awarded for demonstrated need or value of proposed strategies and activities, including demonstration of building climate resilience and community resilience through anticipated project benefits and outcomes. For this, you can use CalAdapt Local Snapshot tool to provide preliminary baseline information. This is a guidance document that can be found on the CRC Application Materials webpage. 5 points can be awarded for effective design of proposed strategies and activities to deliver meaningful benefits and outcomes to local priority populations. 18 points can be awarded for proposed work plan, which provides clear, comprehensive plans with activities focused on the proposed project area and site. 15 points can be awarded for draft emergency plans and year-round community resilience plans that demonstrate the ability to serve local community during emergencies and year-round, with specific attention to those priority populations. And 2 points can be awarded for long-term usage of the CRC facility to ensure CRC will continue to serve local community. Evidence of ability to exceed the 15 years minimum of the CRC facility usage points post-grant term is what we're looking for there. For project impact, these are also additional points that can be awarded, up to 5 total. The first is for proposals, first point for proposals located in and benefiting priority communities. 1 point for proposals located in and benefiting disadvantaged incorporated communities, tribal communities, and or rural communities. 1 point for proposals that can include a partnership with a workforce development organization or workforce development board. 1 point for proposals that demonstrate an ability to pursue additional labor and workforce measures like a community workforce agreement, community benefits agreement, project labor agreement, and or local targeted hire practices for construction and retrofits. And 1 point for proposals that demonstrate additional or strengthened labor or workforce measures beyond the state prevailing wage requirement during the grant term. For project feasibility, perfect. We have a total of 30 points. So the first 5 points are for overall project design and feasibility that are clear, relevant, and appropriate given the project vision statement, the program objectives, specific site, and specific local community. 5 points for demonstrated ability to meet all site readiness requirements and the CRC project requirements and program thresholds by the program deadlines. There are 10 points for the timeline and budget sections that provide clear understanding of local community strengths, technical needs, and proposed activities. and 10 points for the demonstration of financial sustainability, inclusive of operations and maintenance costs and services for the program. This last section is on the sharing plan, which is 5 points total, awarded for replicability and usefulness for other communities with clear, effective plans for sharing. And next, I'll go ahead and pass it to Coral to cover grant administration.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Dora. So for administration of implementation grants, grant terms are 5 years, a 4-year project completion period followed by a 1-year performance period, during which project outcomes will be monitored and grant closeout activities will conclude. Grants will be executed between SGC and the lead applicant only. And implementation grant agreements for projects where the lead applicant is a federally recognized Native American tribe will include language giving SGC a right to sue the tribe for breach of the grant agreement in California state courts. Next slide, please. So there are 2 methods that we can disperse and account funds. The first of those is advance payment, which I will cover on this slide. So SGC may provide advance payment to qualifying awardees to ensure effective implementation of the program. Advance payments can be up to 25% of the total grant award, spread across a series of installments between the start date identified in the grant agreement up until June 30th, 2025. The complete schedule, process, and reporting requirements for advance pay will be determined in the grant agreement. And then per the program's specific advance pay authority, advance payment will be limited to the service portions of awards when the grantee is a community-based private nonprofit agency, which can include but isn't limited to community-based organizations and non-governmental organizations. Government entities, including city and county government and federally recognized California Native American tribes, are not eligible for advance payment. And again, that's because of the legislative authority we were given for the program. All grantees eligible for advance payment will be required to prioritize partners that experience low cash reserves to receive advances. Section 10.4, Disbursement and Accounting of Funds in the Round 1 Final Guidelines has more information on how to receive advance payment. Next slide. To go over the disbursement process broadly, the grantee can't request advance payment or reimbursement for any costs incurred or work completed before grant execution. Grantees may request advance payment or reimbursement from SGC for implementation grants on a quarterly basis, so every 3 months. And then SGC will retain the last 5% of the overall grant budget to be paid once the state has determined that the grant terms have been fulfilled. For reimbursement-based payments, partners will need to invoice the grantee before the grantee submits an invoice to SGC. The grantee will be responsible for compiling all invoices, supporting documentation, and reporting materials for themselves and the partners into a single package. Once the package has been approved for payment, funds will be dispersed to the grantee. The grantee is responsible for dispersing payment to their partners in accordance with their signed partnership agreement. Tribes will not be required to sign a limited waiver of sovereign immunity to receive payments on a reimbursement basis from SGC through the CRC program. Wonderful. So now moving on to reporting requirements. If we can head to the next slide, please. So all grantees can expect to participate in regular check-in meetings with CRC staff and contractors throughout the grant term. During these meetings, grantees can describe their work and staff will offer feedback and guidance on draft deliverables. During each check-in meeting, staff will take notes on accomplishments, challenges, and lessons learned to identify any emerging trends, best practices, or opportunities for greater support and success stories. Staff and contractors will also support grantees in meeting the various administrative criteria, developing financial and grant management processes, and building connections between grantees and state and federal agencies. The lead applicant, as the liaison between staff and partners, will participate in more frequent check-in meetings with CRC program staff and contractors. The grantee check-in meeting schedule will align with the invoicing schedule. Partners can expect to participate in 2 full collaborative check-ins each grant year. Next slide, please. So in addition to regular check-ins, grantees will need to submit annual progress reports that provide updates on the overall status of the grant. These will include high-level questions that are not captured in the regular check-ins. And then grantees will also need to submit a final report on the overall status of the grant at the end of the grant term, including lessons learned, barriers, and success stories. For budget reports, you will also need to submit an inventory of purchased equipment that will be reported on annually and at the end of the grant term. Detailed work plans and budgets can and will be revised on a regular basis. These documents will contain more detail than the grant agreement and will be used as administrative tracking tools between the grantee and the state. And then finally, reporting templates and forms. SGC will provide templates for the progress reports, work plan, budget, invoice form, advance payment request form, and reimbursement request forms. These documents will record the project's expenditures and assess general progress on deliverables. So as far as data collection and indicator tracking goes and the requirements around this for grantees, grantees will need to work with a third-party evaluator that will develop an overall evaluation framework for the CRC program. And they will also work with grantees to identify indicators for tracking and monitoring for their project. The evaluation is going to seek to provide specific measurable outcomes achieved by the program that will provide lessons learned and potential recommendations for overall program improvement. So CRC funded projects might be subject to state prevailing wage requirements pursuant to Section 1700 of the California Labor Code. Grantees must ensure that any public work activities, which is essentially kind of construction activities under the grant agreement, complies with the following list: that prevailing wages are paid, that the project budget and invoices for labor reflects prevailing wage requirements, or if exempt, provide the applicable exemption to SGC with the project budget, that the project complies with all other requirements of prevailing wage law, including but not limited to keeping accurate payroll records and complying with all working hour requirements and apprenticeship obligations. And the grantee will also need to ensure that its partners and subcontractors, if any, comply with prevailing wage requirements. Perfect. So the final grant administration sections are ownership. So this is taking a look at ownership of equipment, vehicles, and infrastructure. We do have a section on publicity requirements you can take a look at, as well as audit and record retention and performance on the grant. For more detail on these, please take a look at sections 10.7 through section 10.10 in the grant administration portion of the guidelines. I won't go over these in detail, but information is included in there. And that is all for implementation grants. So you made it to the end almost. I will now pass it to Jess to share about the application resources and materials that we have.
Great, thanks, Coral. So yes, lots to cover with the implementation grants. We just have a little bit left to go. We're going to share some of the application resources and materials that we have available, and then we'll move into our submittable demo and then end with some final reminders and the office hour schedule again. So all of the program resources and materials can be found on the CRC resources page. You can find this page by navigating to this button on the CRC webpage that says CRC resources. The blue arrow on the screen is pointing to it right now. So if you click on that button, it will take you to the CRC resources page. Across the top, you will see 3 main buckets. That's that right top image on the screen. The buckets are program information, program guidelines, and application materials. The CRC team will be hosting office hours throughout the application window to support applicants, and you can find that full office hour schedule with registration information underneath that top kind of buckets across the top of the page. And then at the very, very bottom, you will see a program timeline that we will cover briefly in a moment. All right, so in the most left bucket, program information, the top button takes you directly to the program's fact sheet. This gives a high-level summary at a glance of the program. Also in this bucket, you can find the CRC grant type guide, which helps applicants identify which grant type would be the best fit for them and their communities. And lastly, on the left-hand side bucket, that bottom button will take you to a web page of frequently asked questions with answers about the program. In that middle bucket, program guidelines, the button will take you to a separate page where you can find the CRC Round 1 final guidelines, a staff report and memo that kind of summarize the changes that were made from the draft, along with the first video of this series, the CRC Round 1 final guidelines and NOPA webinar. In the most right bucket, application materials, there are two buttons, Round 1 app materials and Round 1 application TA. The application TA button takes you to a separate page that tells you about our application TA program. While we are offering technical assistance and the request form remains open for the next couple weeks until early August, in the event that resources become more available, there is not a high likelihood of TA resources being available to accommodate any additional requests at this time. That first button, Round 1 app materials, will have the majority of resources and materials you will need for your application. Once you open this, it takes you to a CRC application materials page that we reference a few times in the application itself. This is where you can find the link to the application on the submittable platform, guidance documents, the notice of funding availability, intent to apply survey, which is optional and will remain open throughout the application period, and the full application webinar series. At the top of the CRC application materials page, you will find the button that takes you to the grant application on the submittable platform. The section underneath that is where you can find guidance documents that will be useful to reference as you are developing your applications. The project area mapping guide will be useful for implementation grant applicants and will hopefully be released when this video is posted. All right, so with that, I think we are going to go ahead and start our submittable demo. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can open up the submittable platform. All right. So here is the implementation grant application. It provides a high-level summary of the implementation grants and shares where you can find more information about the CRC program. Again, you can go to the webpage, review the guidelines, grant type guide, and other. And we want to note that this application does include several components. So applicants must complete all the required sections on the online form via Submittable. In the event that an applicant exceeds the file size limits via Submittable, please contact us, our team at crc@sgc.ca.gov to inquire about alternate methods of submission for additional documentation. Also, applicants must download, complete, and re-upload the required application components. These can include the community engagement plan template we talked about, the workbook that includes the work plan and budget. We have a partnership agreement template on there. So you will need to download those, complete, rename with the appropriate naming convention, which we do also clearly define in the application we'll see in a moment, and then you will re-upload. And then, of course, reference other CRC application materials as relevant on the application materials webpage. We have some guidance documents, and then we do have those templates built into the submittable process. So before you begin, here are just a few items to keep in mind. Once you create a submittable account to begin a specific CRC grant type application, in this case, the implementation grant application, you can share your login credentials with other partners to work on a shared application. Submittable allows you to save progress along the way, so you can begin and come back to the application over time. But if you decide to instead apply for a different CRC grant type, for example, you started an implementation grant application and want to switch to project development grant application, you will unfortunately have to begin a new application in that new project type, project development, and re-enter your information. If you do have any questions about Submittable, we encourage you to contact their helpline. It's linked right here. They'll be able to help you out with any questions you might have that is about this platform, Submittable. So as you work on your application, please keep in mind that there are instructions included throughout the application on how to complete the implementation grant application. There are additional reference documents to support the development of your application that can be found on the CRC. CRC program staff are creating online videos, this being one that detail each grant type. So please reference this series, this video, or the other grant type videos in this series to better understand each specific grant type, the application components, and the process, and what that timeline looks like. CRC program staff will host virtual office hours to invite interested applicants to ask questions and workshop issues. So you can see our office hours schedule and register on the CRC program resources webpage, also linked here. Given the lag time on website updates, please email the crc@sgc.ca.gov account for the fastest, most accurate, and most tailored guidance from the CRC program team. Due to high volume of interest, emailing the team inbox is recommended and typically faster than emailing individual staff members. Okay, and then you have a little note here from our team. We're very excited to start reviewing applications and support applicants in this process. So thank you so much for your interest. All right, and then before we kind of dive into the application again, here's how you can invite team members to collaborate on your application. So you can click on Manage Collaborators here at the top right corner of the screen. A dialog box will appear asking you to enter the email addresses of your collaborators. You can enter that address and then press Invite. Invited collaborators will receive an email letting them know you have invited them to collaborate on a draft submission using Submittable. In order to communicate with collaborators through the Submittable platform, though, all invitees must accept the invite before the owner of the submission hits Submit. After you've sent invitations to collaborate, you can click on the Invite Collaborators link again, the Manage Collaborators up here. And you can see the status of your invitations. In the row for each invitee who has not yet accepted their invitation, you will see a pending indication. There will also be a trash can next to each person's name so that the submission owner can remove anyone that they no longer want to collaborate on the submission with. And you can follow this link below that's kind of the font color is red for more information on how to collaborate with someone on a submission. So section 1 contains general application questions. The questions and fields to upload documents are marked with an asterisk and they will be required. There are also required fields that have response required text below the question to indicate that as well. So I'm just kind of going to go through this quickly with you all. See, we have all of the questions outlined. We have the character limits. We have the response required indicated. Right. And then our section 2 is all of the required components. We have our application workbook. This is a really great example that we'll go into. We have our general instructions. Then we have some references in our guidelines. If you click on these links, it'll take you to the direct section we're referencing. And then underneath here are steps to complete and upload the application workbook template that we've provided. So you can download the application workbook here. Then you will complete it and re-upload to Submittable using the appropriate naming convention, which we outline here. So lead applicant _ proposal name _ IG for implementation grant application workbook. And then this is the field that you would upload it to. All right, and we're going to do a quick example of how to upload your file. You click on choose file, and then you will click on your file, open. Sometimes it takes a while depending on the size of your file, how long it will take to upload, but it should upload there. And that's how you upload a file. So hopefully it is relatively easy for you all. If you find that you've uploaded the wrong file, you can delete it here or you can re-download it. So we're just going to delete that. All right, and then we'll just keep kind of rolling through the application. We do have our 200-word limit. So we do limit characters and words for some of these fields. Of course, the asterisk functions indicate that this is required. And everything is built, everything that we will need to know from you is built into the platform, the application on Submittable. So hopefully it takes away any confusion or any fears that you might not be uploading everything that you need. Everything that we've included in this has been extremely intentional and thoughtful so that you are providing the documentation and required reports that we do need. So I'm going to kind of really quickly scroll through this because it's kind of a long application. It's the longest of the 3 CRC grant types. So we'll get here down here at the bottom. All right, so here we are. We are at the bottom. We do have this last section, number 4, for any additional documentation. That's where you can obviously upload any additional documentation you may want us to have that could maybe indicate, your financial capacity or applicant capacity, or your maybe organizational capacity to manage the grant. And then you will find this at the end. You've finished completing the round 1 implementation grant application. So once you've met this part of the application, you've completed all of the fields, you've uploaded all of the files that you need to, you've answered all of the narrative questions. We do recommend going back and reviewing your materials and answers to confirm that all the attachments are correct, current, and appropriately titled. You'll receive an email confirmation when your application has been successfully submitted. So make sure to check your email to confirm that you've received that receipt, because if you do not receive one, then you will not receive any other important information relevant to your CRC Round 1 implementation grant application. So definitely check your junk or spam filters on your email account. Check to make sure that you are checking on the email address that you use to set up your submittable account. And then also make sure that you've successfully submitted the application and it is not remained as a saved draft in your account. And with that, that concludes our submittable demo. All right, so here is the updated program timeline. July 2023, full application materials were released and our applications on Submittable opened. July through September, we will have our full application webinar series released. That is including these videos, the video on the planning grants and project development grants, and then of course that first video on the round 1 guidelines and a notice of funding availability. Our team will also be hosting virtual office hours during this application window to support our applicants. On August 25th, our pre-proposals are due. We do want to note that that priority deadline is August 4th. That priority deadline is just so that you can receive unscored feedback by the CRC team to inform your application development. Again, whether you'd like to strengthen some program thresholds, or if there are areas that you need to work on, or if you should maybe pivot to another certain grant type or pursue the full application for implementation grants. Then September 18th, all final applications will be due for all CRC grant types. And then lastly, in December 2023, we are hoping for SGC to make our round 1 awards. So throughout the application window, as I mentioned, our team will host virtual office hours to support our applicants. Please note that there are 4 audience-specific workshops in the series intended for applicants from rural and tribal communities. Please be mindful of this while registering to attend an office hour session. Please also note that there are a total of 4 that have been extended to 2 hours in length each. Prior registration is encouraged. The last 2 in August and the last 2 of the September office hours have been extended to that 2-hour time frame. So when you register, you will be able to submit questions to be answered during the Q&A portion of the office hour. But of course, come to the office hours with your questions. We would love to provide any of those answers and talk through some project ideas with you. Additionally, you can also indicate other translation or interpretation requests on that registration form as well. And again, you can find the full schedule for this and registration information on the CRC resources page. And lastly, we just want to thank you for showing interest in our program, for watching this video, and please feel free to contact us with any questions you may have. Our email is down in the video description, as well as our webpage and a link to sign up for the CRC email list to receive regular updates about the program. So thank you again so much for joining us today. We would love the opportunity to connect with you to send forthcoming application materials and important due dates about the program. So if you have a moment, please fill out our brief post-webinar survey, also linked in the video description below. Again, thank you so much for your interest in this exciting new program.